Hello all, welcome back to FAD Learning. In our previous video, we covered a step-by-step implementation of a counter example with NgRx going through each step in detail. So let's quickly recap all 6 steps. First, we created action for increment, decrement and reset. Second, we created a reducer and added logic for each action to update the state. Third, we register this counter reducer in app.config.ts file. Fourth, we define an interface for type safety called iCounter, but this step is optional. Fifth, we used the selector to retrieve the state from the store. And sixth, we dispatched actions and used a sync pipe to bind the counter variable to the template. And lastly, to retrieve the updated counter value in other admin and user components, we used selectors. Okay. Now, in this section, let's explore props in NgRx, also known as payloads. And to demonstrate this, we will continue with our counter example, walking through the same steps to see how props work in action. So first, I'll run this project using command ngs and I'll open it in the browser. And let's start by understanding the scenario. So far, we have set the initial counter value to 0, which means the counter will start from 0. However, if you want to allow users to customize the starting value of the counter, then we will need to add an input field and a button to send the user input. And this will enable users to input their desired value and the counter will increment or decrement accordingly when they click the respective buttons. So let's go ahead and implement this. So for this custom counter functionality, I'll create a new component called custom counter component. So here I'll use CLI command ng generate component name custom counter, and our custom counter component is created. Now I'll go inside app.component.html file, and below this existing buttons, I'll add a custom counter selector separated by an HR tag. So here inside div, I'll add app custom counter. And also I need to import the same component inside the imports array, not in the user component. Inside the app component, we need to import the custom counter component. Okay. And now if I revisit the browser, we can see the custom counter component on the UI. Now next, I'll open the custom counter component template file and I'll add an input field and button. And since we are focusing on functionality, for now I'll keep the design simple using basic bootstrap classes. So div dot text center, then div dot row, and div dot call well. Now here I'll take one input field with type number. Also I'll add the placeholder, add to counter, and then I'll add one button with class btn primary, btn small sm, and margin 2, and the button name is add counter. Okay. Also I'll add a click event with function add counter. Next we need to define this add counter function inside the class file of the same component, and also I'll declare one variable to store the custom counter value, and the variable name add counter value of type number. Okay. And to fetch the user's input, I'll bind this add counter value variable to the input field using two-way data binding. Inside the template file, here inside input box, I'll use banana in a box syntax with ng model equals to, I'll paste add counter value variable. And since this ng model is a part of forms module, we need to import it from the angular/forms package. Forms module from angular/forms. Okay. Now next, To verify the input is being captured correctly, I'll add console log inside this add counter function to print the user's input. I format the document and save the changes. Now I'll go back to browser and inspect this page, navigate to the console tab. And now when I type a number in this input field like 12 and click the add counter button, we can see the user's input logged in the console. And this completes the basic UI setup for our custom counter functionality. Okay, now let's implement the actual functionality of the custom counter example. And to do this, we need to send the user input to the main state counter, which will then update the counter values across all three components. So let's proceed step by step. First step is to create an action for the add counter button. So let me go inside counter.action.ts file and let's define and export the new action called add custom counter using the create action function. And now this action function takes two parameters, the action type and the payload or props. So the action type will be counter for add custom counter. And it indicates that this add custom counter action belongs to the counter feature and is triggered when the user wants to add a custom counter value. And for the payload, we need to use the props function from RxJS store. And here we can pass an interface or define a payload structure directly. Like inside curly brackets, we need to write the structure. So for this example, I'll add value of type number and open and close round brackets. Okay, so we have created an add custom counter action for add counter functionality. Now let's go ahead and implement the logic for this functionality in the reducer file. So let me open the reducer file, and inside this file we will add one more on function to handle the add custom counter action, which is imported from counter.action file. And here we need to pass the state and action, and it returns the new state value that's calculated by adding the current state value to action.addValue. This means we are adding the user's input value to the current counter state. This is our current counter state and this is our user's input value. Okay. Now we have done with the action and reducer part. Now the next step is to register the reducer in the app.config.ts file using the key value pair. But we have already completed this step for the counter reducer. So let's move on with the next step, that is dispatch an action. And to do this, we will dispatch the add custom counter action from the custom counter component class file. So first we need to inject the store from NgRx store into the components constructor. So here inside constructor, I'll write private store :store, which is imported from NgRx store and which will allow us to use the dispatch method. And here when injecting the store, we can specify the data type or an interface. So for now, I'll pass an iCounter interface to the store. And now we can use the store.dispatch method to dispatch the add custom counter action. So inside this add counter function, I'll write this dot store dot dispatch, and inside this method, we need to specify the action, that is add custom counter. And this add custom counter action expects an add value property of type number. So we will pass the user's input value to it. That is, here we need to add value add counter value. And we need to pass this inside the curly brackets. And one more thing, here we will use the unary operator, that is plus symbol, to convert the add counter value to a number, ensuring that the values are added correctly rather than concatenated. And that's it for this class file. And we have already written the necessary code inside the custom counter component template file. Now let's revisit the browser and test the functionality to see it in action. Now here, when I enter the number 10 and click the add counter button, the counter value updated to 10. And when I click the increment or decrement buttons, the counter value will update from the user entered number. And you can see the updated counter value in all three components: app component, user component, and admin component. Okay. Now, if I want to add the 10 number to this current counter value, so I need to click on this add counter, the 10 plus 8, 18. Okay. We have successfully demonstrated how to customize the counter value based on user inputs using NgRx. And by utilizing props in actions, we are able to pass dynamic values to the reducer, which then updates the state accordingly. Let me recap what we have done so far. So first we designed the UI for custom counter functionality. Then we created an action for add custom counter with props. Then we created a reducer for the newly created action. And finally, using the stores dispatch method, we dispatched the add custom counter action with a user input value. Now, in the same way, we can also remove counter values based on user input. So let's quickly implement this feature as well. And to do this, I'll update the UI to include remove counter input field and button. So here, let me update this column to 6 and this to 6. Let's update the variable name. Instead of add, I'll write remove counter variable, and let's define the same counter variable inside the class file of type number. And here, this exclamatory marks is the definite assignment assertion operator. It tells TypeScript that this property will definitely be initialized before it's used. Okay. And next, I'll update the placeholder remove from count. And then I'll update the function name, remove counter. We need to define the same function inside the class file. And here the button name is remove count. Okay, save the changes and inside class file, let me define the function remove counter. So we have done the UI part for remove counter functionality. Now next, let's create a new action called remove custom counter and update its type to reflect the removal operation. Here, update this add with remove. And we will also rename the add value variable to remove value. Okay. Now let's update the reducer file by adding a new on function for remove custom counter action, which we need to import from counter.action file. Okay. And we need to modify the logic to subtract the value by using minus instead of plus, and update the variable name to remove value. Okay. Now last, let's switch to the custom counter component class file, and inside the remove counter function, let's dispatch the remove custom counter action using the store.dispatch method. Let me copy paste this line, and here we need to update the action, that is remove custom counter, and we need to pass remove value as remove counter value. Now save the changes and let's test this as well. Now this time I'll add 20 to this counter, add counter. The number 20 is added to the current counter, and then I wish to subtract 10 from the current counter value. So once I click on this remove counter button, we can see the updated counter value in all three components. That is 20 minus 10, 10. And now the counter can be increased or decreased as expected. It means everything seems to be working correctly. So we can update the counter value by clicking on this add counter and remove counter button. Okay, so I'll stop the video here, and I hope you understand this custom counter functionality using NgRx props. If yes, please do like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to FAD Learning. I'll catch you in the next video. Until then, keep visiting and keep learning. Thank you. Bye bye.